The tent was dimly lit, the kind of light that seemed to soak into the khaki canvas rather than brighten it. A single lantern swung from a metal hook, casting long shadows across the room where the Navy SEAL team sat in silence. They were used to this atmosphere quiet before the storm, orders hanging in the air like an unspoken weight. The air was thick with dust, the smell of gun oil, and the faint tang of sweat from bodies that had long since grown accustomed to discomfort. At the head of the room stood Commander Harris, his hands pressed firmly against the folding table where a map lay spread open. His face was lined, hard from decades in the field, but his eyes were sharp, piercing in a way that made every man present sit straighter. The mission mattered. The mission always mattered. But tonight, something in Harris's tone suggested this operation carried stakes beyond the usual. "Listen up," he began, voice steady and controlled, each word delivered with deliberate weight. "We've got actionable intel that a high-value insurgent leader is operating out of the Kunar Valley. You've all heard of it. Steep ridges, caves running like veins through the mountains, and villages that look peaceful until rifles come out of the shadows." The men exchanged brief glances, their expressions unreadable. They'd been in valleys like that before. They'd seen peaceful villages that turned hostile the moment their boots hit the ground. Harris's voice cut through the silence again. "This target isn't just another foot soldier. He's running logistics, moving weapons through those mountains, arming cells across the region. If he keeps his network alive, more Americans die. Our window to cut the head off this snake is small, and you're it." Chief Petty Officer Blake, the team leader, leaned forward, his eyes narrowing on the map. He was a mountain of a man with years of combat behind him, the kind of leader whose presence could anchor an entire squad in the storm. He studied the terrain marked in red ink arrows, pointing to ridgelines, circles around suspected compounds. "What's our infiltration route?" Blake asked, his voice low but carrying. Harris tapped the map with his pen. "You'll insert here, 2 clicks north of the valley edge. No vehicles, the sound will give you away. You'll move under cover of darkness. Once you hit this ridge, you'll have to go on foot, scaling down into the basin. Your objective is here." He jabbed a spot on the map circled twice. "Intel suggests he'll be meeting his lieutenants around dawn." The SEALs leaned in closer. Every detail mattered. Every mark on the map could mean life or death. "Extraction?" Blake asked. Harris exhaled slowly, as though weighing the words. "Helos will be on standby, but don't count on a quick pickup. That valley's like a trap. Narrow, rocky, and every villager with a phone will be reporting your movements the second they see you. If you get pinned, you'll have to fight your way to higher ground before we can send birds in." The silence in the tent thickened. The SEALs weren't strangers to being cut off, but knowing they might be left to claw their way out of hell without immediate backup was a sobering thought. Petty Officer Ramirez, the youngest of the group, shifted slightly in his chair. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on the map as if memorizing every contour. He wasn't afraid, not outwardly, but the gravity of the mission pressed against his chest like an invisible weight. Beside him, Petty Officer Daniels cracked his knuckles softly, his trademark gesture before every op. He was the team's sniper, quiet and watchful, his mind already calculating angles and vantage points where he could lay down cover fire. Harris continued, his voice sharper now. "You'll be carrying light. No room for heavy gear. Ammunition, rations, radios, that's it. You won't have luxuries out there. And remember," his gaze swept across the room, pinning each man in place, "you're walking into a valley that's alive. Every ridge, every boulder, every shadow could be an ambush. This is hostile ground. Treat it as such." Blake straightened, his jaw tightening. "Understood? What's the contingency if we run into larger resistance?" Harris didn't hesitate. Adapt, improvise, survive. That's what you do best. The mission is priority one. Gather intel, disrupt the meeting if possible, and get out alive. But make no mistake, if things go south, you won't have the luxury of time. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the low hum of the lantern and the faint rustle of the canvas walls against the desert wind. Each man let the words sink in, processing the risks, replaying the commander's map in their minds. Finally, Blake nodded. "We'll get it done." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of absolute certainty. The kind of certainty forged only in fire and blood, when men had no room for doubt. Harris looked at them one last time, his voice quieter now. "You've all been here before. You know what's waiting for you out there. But you're the best this country has, and if anyone can bring this mission home, it's you." The briefing ended with a sharp salute. Chairs scraped quietly as the men rose, their movements disciplined, deliberate. No chatter, no wasted words. They knew what lay ahead. Outside the tent, the night was vast and cold, the stars sharp against the Afghan sky. The camp bustled quietly, in the distance generators humming, boots crunching over gravel. The occasional clank of metal as equipment was checked and rechecked. The SEALs walked together, but spoke little. Each man carried his thoughts privately, replaying the mission in his head. They moved toward their gear rifles, lined in perfect rows, body armor stacked neatly, night vision goggles waiting in their cases. The ritual of preparation began. Daniels ran a cloth over the barrel of his sniper rifle, checking the chamber, feeling the cold steel beneath his fingers. Ramirez adjusted the straps on his plate carrier, his lips pressed into a thin line as he muttered under his breath, a silent prayer no one else could hear. Blake moved through the group, his eyes scanning, his presence steady. He didn't need to say anything. His calm was enough to steady them all. As they checked and rechecked their equipment, the reality of the mission solidified. In a few hours, they would leave the relative safety of the camp and disappear into the mountains. By dawn, they would be ghosts in hostile territory, shadows creeping through valleys where every villager could be friend or foe. And though none of them spoke it aloud, they all felt the same truth. Tomorrow might be their last day. Yet not one of them wavered. When the commander returned to dismiss them, his final words lingered in the air long after he was gone. Stay sharp. Trust each other. And remember, you're not just soldiers. You're SEALs. Bring each other home. The men exchanged silent nods. They strapped on their gear, slung rifles across their shoulders, and stepped into the night. The mission had begun. The night was a cloak, thick and heavy, draping itself over the jagged mountains of eastern Afghanistan. The moon hovered low in the sky, a pale shard of silver, its light cutting faint lines across the stone ridges. To most, the valley would have seemed lifeless, a barren wilderness of rock and shadow. But to the men moving silently through it, the night was alive. Every crunch of gravel beneath their boots, every whisper of wind against the cliffs, carried meaning. The SEAL team moved in single file, their silhouettes blending into the terrain. They were trained to vanish into landscapes, to become shadows within shadows. Each man carried close to 60 pounds of deer rifles slung tight, night vision goggles strapped to their helmets, hydration tubes draped across their shoulders. Their steps were calculated, every movement controlled. No one stumbled. No one spoke. Chief Petty Officer Blake led the way, his eyes scanning constantly, head turning slightly with each step. Behind him followed Daniels, the sniper, carrying the long, slender rifle wrapped in dark cloth to keep it from catching stray moonlight. Ramirez brought up the rear, his youthful face hidden behind layers of camouflage paint. The others filled the gaps, each man knowing his role, his place in the chain. The first hours were uneventful, filled only with the rhythm of breathing and the steady crunch of boots. But tension hung in the air, a tension they all felt but didn't acknowledge. Villages dotted the valley floor, clusters of mud brick houses barely visible in the dark. To the untrained eye, they were quiet, sleeping. To the seals, they were potential eyes and ears. Even in the dead of night, curtains could twitch, dogs could bark, phones could buzz with warnings. At one point, a faint light flickered in the distance, a lone lantern burning in a hut. The team froze instantly, crouching low, weapons raised. They waited, hearts thudding softly in their chests, breaths controlled. After a long minute, the light dimmed, vanishing as suddenly as it appeared. Blake gave the silent signal with 2 fingers. Move. And just like that, the seals melted back into the dark. The climb grew harder as they pushed deeper into the valley. The ground tilted upward, jagged and uneven, forcing them to use hands as well as feet. Rocks shifted beneath their weight, threatening to tumble noisily down the slopes. Every sound felt dangerous, amplified in the silence. Blake moved carefully, testing each foothold before committing. The men behind him mirrored his precision, their discipline absolute. 2 hours before dawn, the wind picked up, whispering through the gullies and rattling loose stones. The temperature dropped sharply, breath fogging faintly in front of their faces. Sweat chilled on their backs beneath the armor. Still, they pressed on, following the path mapped out in the briefing. A ridge loomed ahead, a massive wall of stone they would need to descend before reaching the basin where their target was believed to be. They stopped briefly in a shallow depression, kneeling low, checking gear in silence. Ramirez adjusted the sling of his rifle, his hands trembling slightly before he stilled them. Daniels scanned the ridgelines through his scope, though the night revealed little more than shadows stacked upon shadows. Blake knelt with the radio operator, checking signals, nothing but static. Ramirez whispered, voice barely audible. Feels like we're being watched. Daniels gave him a glance, but said nothing. In war zones like this, the feeling was constant. The land itself seemed alive, watching, waiting. Blake gave the silent signal to move again, and the team rose, continuing their careful advance. They skirted along a dry riverbed, its stones smooth and pale under the moon. The silence here was different, heavier, as if the valley held its breath. Then, somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. The sound cracked through the night, sharp and warning. The men froze once more, sinking low, weapons raised. The barking grew frantic, echoing across the basin, before it was cut off suddenly, almost unnaturally. Ramirez swallowed hard. They know, he mouthed, though no sound escaped his lips. Blake's eyes narrowed. He knew better than to assume they were still hidden. Villagers loyal to the insurgents were everywhere, and a barking dog in the night could carry as much danger as a rifle. He gave the signal to move faster, urgency creeping into the march. The terrain grew steeper, rocks jutting out like broken teeth. Their boots scraped quietly against the stone, their muscles burning with the climb. Yet no one faltered. SEALs were trained for this. The exhaustion, the silence, the constant pressure of unseen eyes. Every man in that line had already lived through hell once. Tonight, they were simply stepping back into it. As they neared the crest of the ridge, Blake raised a fist. Halt! The line stopped instantly. He crouched, peering over the edge. Beyond the ridge stretched the basin, a dark bowl of earth surrounded by towering cliffs. The village lay further south, its outlines faint in the gloom, but there was movement. Tiny lights flickered, torch-like, where none should have been at this hour. Daniels crawled up beside Blake, raising his scope. He scanned slowly, patiently. Shadows shifted near the village. Figures moved. Not many, but enough to confirm what they all suspected. The valley wasn't sleeping. They're awake, Daniels whispered, his voice barely audible. Blake's jaw tightened. The mission wasn't compromised yet, but they weren't ghosts anymore either. Somewhere down there, eyes were waiting for them. The team crouched low, hugging the rocks, their breaths steady. No one spoke. No one needed to. Each man knew the truth. The valley had swallowed them whole, and now it was only a matter of time before it spit them back out dead or alive. As they began their descent, the silence grew sharper, more dangerous. A stone shifted under Ramirez's boot, tumbling into the dark. The faint clatter echoed down the slope. For a heartbeat, everything froze. No answering sound came. No shout, no gunfire. But the feeling in their guts deepened. They were being watched. Dawn crept slowly into the valley, painting the jagged ridges with a faint orange glow. The seals had made it halfway down the ridge, moving carefully across a rocky slope that offered little cover. Their bodies were stiff from the night march. Sweat cooled into salt stains across their uniforms, but they pressed forward, every sense sharpened by the knowledge that daylight meant danger. Chief Petty Officer Blake raised his hand, signaling a halt. He crouched low behind a boulder and lifted his binoculars. Below, the basin stretched wide, its floor broken by dry riverbeds and scattered shrubs. The village to the south was eerily still now, its earlier flickers of light extinguished. It should have been quiet, peaceful even. But to Blake, it felt wrong. Too quiet. Too still. He lowered the binoculars and gestured for Daniels to scan. The sniper slid into position, laying prone, scope sweeping the valley floor. For a long moment, nothing stirred. Just the whisper of wind through the rocks. Then, in the corner of his vision, movement. A shadow. A glint of metal where there shouldn't have been one. Contact, Daniels whispered. The word barely left his lips before the world erupted. A thunderous crack split the air, followed by the snapping hiss of rounds slicing overhead. The rocks around them exploded into shards, dust spraying into their faces. Blake dove for cover, shouting, "Ambush! Take cover!" His voice was drowned almost instantly by the roar of gunfire. Dozens of rifles lit up the ridgelines. Tracers streaked across the dawn sky, carving fiery arcs. Bullets hammered into the slope where the seals had been seconds earlier, sending showers of stone and dirt cascading down the incline. Return fire. Blake roared. The team reacted instinctively. Ramirez swung his rifle up, firing controlled bursts toward the muzzle flashes. Daniels rolled to his side, his sniper rifle cracking once, then twice, dropping 2 enemy silhouettes in quick succession. The others joined in, their rifles barking rhythmically, the sound deafening in the enclosed valley. But they were outnumbered, heavily. From the cliffs above, more insurgents appeared, their figures dark against the rising sun. They had the high ground, firing down with ruthless precision. The seals were pinned, trapped in a kill zone with almost no cover. Every movement invited a hail of bullets. Blake slammed himself against a rock barely wide enough to shield half his body. Chips of stone rained down as rounds smacked into the surface. He keyed his radio, voice urgent. "Valkyrie, this is Alpha Team. Contact. Multiple hostiles, heavy fire, requesting immediate extraction over." Static, just static. The valley swallowed his words whole. Radios jammed. The comms operator shouted, ducking as a bullet snapped past his head. Blake cursed under his breath. No air support. No backup. Just them. Shift left. Use the ridge for cover. He ordered. The team began moving in twos, covering each other with suppressive fire. But every attempt to reposition was met with a fresh barrage from above. Ramirez crawled forward on his belly, dirt grinding into his teeth, his rifle clutched tight. He fired blindly toward the cliffs, praying to force the enemy to duck for even a second. A scream cut through the chaos. Petty Officer Cole, the team's breacher, clutched his leg as blood gushed from a torn artery. He fell hard onto the rocks, his weapon slipping from his hands. "Man down," Ramirez shouted. Bullets rained down around them as Blake and another SEAL dragged Cole behind a boulder. Blood soaked their gloves instantly. Blake tore open a tourniquet, cinching it tight above the wound, his jaw clenched. "Stay with me, Cole," he barked. The wounded man groaned, face pale, but his eyes stayed open. For now, rounds kept hammering the rocks. The air was thick with dust and smoke, stinging their eyes, burning their throats. Every breath tasted of grit and cordite. Daniels shifted position, his sniper rifle steady even under the onslaught. He found a shooter perched on the ridge and squeezed the trigger. The man dropped, tumbling down the slope. Another target appeared, and another. For every insurgent Daniels dropped, two more seemed to take his place. The valley was alive with gunfire, echoing off the cliffs like rolling thunder. Ramirez fired until his magazine clicked empty. His hands moved fast, slamming in a fresh mag, chambering the round with practiced speed. His heart hammered, sweat stinging his eyes, but his training kept him moving, shooting, reloading, moving again. "Ammo check," Blake shouted between bursts of fire. 2 mags left. Someone answered. 3. Ramirez called. 5 rounds, sniper only, Daniels muttered. It wasn't enough. Not for the numbers they were facing. From above, the insurgents pressed harder, their war cries echoing across the valley. They advanced in waves, their silhouettes flickering in and out of sight. The SEALs fought back with everything they had, but the circle was closing. A rocket-propelled grenade streaked across the sky, slamming into the rocks just meters from their position. The explosion shook the earth, blasting them with heat and debris. Blake's ears rang, the world spinning in a haze of dust. He tasted blood in his mouth, shook his head, forced himself back into the fight. The team was breaking down. Ammo dwindling. One man bleeding out. No comms, no cover. Blake's gut twisted with the realization. They weren't fighting to win anymore. They were fighting to survive the next minute. Hold the line. He roared, voice raw. But even as he shouted, he knew death was seconds away. The insurgents were closing in, firing from less than 50 yards now. Their confidence was palpable, their voices carrying triumph. The SEALs braced for the final rush, rifles clutched, grenades primed, teeth clenched. And then, a single gunshot cracked through the chaos. Different, sharper, precise. One insurgent dropped instantly, his body folding into the dust. Then another. Blake blinked, stunned for half a second. None of his men had fired those rounds. Somewhere above, hidden in the jagged cliffs, a new player had entered the battlefield. The valley was a furnace of fire and stone. Bullets chewed into the earth, snapping overhead, ricocheting off rocks with sparks that briefly lit the dust-filled air. The SEALs were pinned flat, breathing hard, every second stretched into eternity. Chief Petty Officer Blake pressed his shoulder tight against a jagged boulder, his rifle hot in his hands. His eyes burned from smoke and grit, his throat raw from shouting. He could taste copper in his mouth, or a shard of flying stone had split his lip. Yet he stayed focused, eyes darting from his men to the advancing enemy lines. They were closing fast. 50 yards. Maybe less. Shadows flitted between rocks and low scrub, rifles blazing. Insurgent voices filled the air, angry shouts in Pashto, guttural cries that carried a certainty of victory. Ammo check. Blake barked again, forcing his voice above the roar. Last mag. Ramirez yelled, jamming it into his rifle with shaking hands. 2 left. Daniels called back, his sniper rifle cracked and dusty, but still deadly. The others echoed the same grim tally, barely anything left. Not enough to hold. Not enough to survive. Cole groaned from behind the boulder where he lay bleeding, his face ashen. The tourniquet slowed the bleeding, but his strength was slipping. Petty Officer Hayes knelt beside him, hands stained red, whispering encouragements that Cole was too weak to respond to. Blake's mind raced. Options? None? Extraction? Still dead silence on the radio. Air support? Not coming. Reinforcements? Too far away. They were stranded in a pit with no way out. He leaned over the rock, firing 2 sharp bursts, dropping 1 insurgent before ducking back as rounds shredded the stone above his head. His magazine clicked empty. He slammed in his last one. 30 rounds, he muttered. Make them count. A sudden whistle cut the air RPG. Down. The rocket slammed into the ridge just above. The explosion, a thunderclap that rattled their bones. Shards of stone rained down, slicing through fabric and skin. Ramirez cried out as a jagged rock grazed his arm, blood trickling down. The blast left everyone's ears ringing, sound muffled into a dull roar. But the enemy kept coming, closer, louder, hungrier. Blake crawled over to Ramirez, slapping his shoulder. You good? Ramirez nodded, face pale, jaw clenched. Still fighting. That was all Blake needed to hear. He scanned the battlefield again. The insurgents were fanning out, pushing to encircle their position. If they succeeded, the SEALs would be flanked from both sides, wiped out within minutes. Blake's eyes locked with Daniels. No words passed, but the sniper understood. Daniels shifted his rifle, eyes behind his scope, searching for the squad leaders among the enemy ranks. He fired once, twice. 2 bodies crumpled. But as soon as they fell, others filled their place. The wave didn't stop. Grenades! Blake shouted. Ramirez yanked one from his vest, pulled the pin, and hurled it down the slope. The blast tore through the advancing line, throwing dirt and bodies skyward. Another grenade followed, then another. The explosions bought them seconds. Only seconds. Blake crouched low, sweat pouring into his eyes, heart hammering so hard it hurt. His instinct screamed that the end was coming. Hayes looked up from Cole, his face grim. He's fading, Chief. Blake's stomach twisted. He couldn't afford to lose a man, not here, not like this. But the cold truth cut through him. They might all be gone soon enough. The enemy was within 30 yards now. He could see their faces in the half-light, eyes fierce, teeth bared as they shouted. The SEALs fired back with what little they had left, muzzle flashes strobing in the smoke. Casings spilled onto the rocks. Their rifles grew hotter. Click, Ramirez's rifle jammed. He cursed, yanking the charging handle, hands slick with sweat and blood. He cleared it, fired again. But the panic in his eyes betrayed what they all felt, the inevitability of death. Blake ducked back behind the boulder, chest heaving. His last magazine was nearly empty. He glanced at his men, tired, bloodied, running dry. Cole dying. Hayes nearly out. Daniels stubbornly firing single, perfect shots, but almost done himself. This was it. The thought slammed into him with brutal clarity. We're not making it out. For a heartbeat, time slowed. Blake thought of his wife back home, the picture tucked in his rucksack. He thought of the promise he'd made to his men, to bring them back. And he thought of the oath he had sworn. Never quit. Never leave a man behind. If they were going to die, they'd die fighting. Together. He leaned out from cover, finger tightening on the trigger. Hold the line. "Give him hell!" he roared. The SEALs rose with him, unleashing everything they had left. Short bursts, grenades, even sidearms as their rifles ran dry. They screamed their defiance into the valley, their voices raw, primal, refusing to be silenced. The insurgents surged forward, undeterred, their numbers overwhelming. 20 yards, 15. Blake's rifle clicked empty. He drew his pistol, firing wildly, each shot snapping into the advancing horde. Ramirez did the same, his arm bleeding freely now. Daniels fired his last sniper round, dropping a fighter mid-charge, before slinging the empty rifle aside and grabbing his secondary weapon. 10 yards. The enemy's faces were clear now, sweat glistening on their brows, rifles raised. Death loomed inches away. Blake braced himself, ready to go down fighting. His heart hammered, his vision tunneled. He knew the next few seconds would be the last of his life. And then it happened. A single sharp crack split the air, differing from the chaos. Clean, precise. One insurgent in the lead crumpled instantly, his body folding into the dust. The SEALs froze for half a second, stunned. That shot hadn't come from them. Another crack. Another enemy fell. Then another. Somewhere above, hidden in the rocks, an unseen shooter had entered the fight. For a moment, none of them understood what had just happened. The lead insurgent, only yards away, dropped as if yanked by an invisible hand. His body hit the dirt with a heavy thud, rifle clattering from limp fingers. Blake blinked, chest heaving. That shot hadn't come from their line. The angle was wrong, too steep, too clean. His instincts, honed by years in combat, told him this wasn't luck. Someone else was here. Crack. Another insurgent, one step from firing point blank at Ramirez, spun backward, chest blown open. The fighters faltered. Their charge stumbled, slowed. Confusion rippled through their ranks like a shockwave. They scanned the ridges, shouting in panic, unsure where death was coming from. Blake's heart pounded harder. Relief battled suspicion. Who the hell is out there? Keep firing, he shouted, voice raw. Don't stop. Whoever it is, they're on our side. The SEALs surged with a sudden second wind. Muzzle flashes lit the rocks as they poured their last rounds into the staggered enemy lines. Ramirez, his pistol blazing, gritted his teeth and shouted curses at the retreating shadows. Daniels, calm even in chaos, tracked targets with surgical precision, making every bullet count. But the hidden shooter was different. His shots came measured, deliberate. No panic, no wasted fire. Each crack echoed like a hammer on steel, and with every report, another insurgent collapsed. Headshots, center mass, throats torn open. The battlefield shifted. Where moments before the SEALs had been seconds from annihilation, now the enemy hesitated, their certainty of victory shaken. Shouts in Pashto filled the air, questions, fear, anger. Some fighters fired blindly into the ridges, desperate to hit the ghost that hunted them. Blake used the distraction. Daniels, cover left. Ramirez, right flank. Hayes, keep Cole alive. His commands snapped sharp, his body moving on instinct. They repositioned, turning what had been a death trap into a fighting chance. Another insurgent raised an RPG, his eyes wild as he aimed toward Blake's position. Crack! The rocket never fired. The fighter dropped instantly, his weapon clattering harmlessly into the dirt. Blake couldn't believe it. Whoever was up there had just saved them again. Ramirez's voice cut through the gunfire. Where the hell's it coming from? Blake's eyes darted upward. Through the haze of dust and smoke, he caught a glimpse of movement on the high ridge, a faint silhouette perched against the jagged skyline. A man, steady, unmoving except for the calm rhythm of his rifle. Not Taliban. Not insurgent. A professional. The realization struck Blake cold. Whoever it was, he knew what he was doing. This wasn't random intervention. This was skill, the kind you didn't find outside special operations. Keep your eyes on the fight, Blake barked, dragging himself back into the moment. Don't worry about him, let him work. But his mind wouldn't let go of the thought. Was this sniper American? Allied? Or someone else entirely an unseen shadow with his own agenda? The insurgents were breaking now. Every shot from the hidden marksman pushed them further into disarray. Fighters scrambled for cover, some retreating into the rocks, others firing aimlessly, their discipline unraveling. Blake seized the chance. Push forward. Take the ridge. The SEALs surged from behind their battered cover, moving with the last reserves of their strength. Gunfire roared as they pressed the advantage, grenades booming across the slope, scattering enemy formations. Cole groaned weakly from behind Hayes, but Blake could hear it hope in his voice, where before there had been only silence. They might live through this. Ramirez fired until his pistol clicked empty, then scooped up an enemy AK from the dirt, unleashing fresh fire with a savage grin. You picked the wrong bay, boys, he shouted into the chaos. Daniels dropped another target with cold precision and crouched low, scanning the ridge. Chief, he called, voice measured even under fire. That's no local. Whoever's up there, he's one of us. Blake met his eyes for a split second. Daniels didn't need to explain. The shot cadence, the discipline, the accuracy, it screamed military. Maybe American. Maybe not. But someone trained like them. The hidden shooter fired again. Another enemy toppled. Then another. Each shot gave the SEALs another heartbeat, another step closer to survival. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the gunfire started to thin. The enemy lines wavered. Shouts grew more desperate. One by one, insurgents broke off, retreating into the jagged rocks, dragging their wounded with them. The valley, moments ago a killing ground, began to fall silent. The SEALs crouched low, breathing hard, weapons still raised. The acrid stench of gunpowder clung to the air. Smoke curled upward in lazy tendrils from scattered patches of burning brush. Blake scanned the ridges, eyes straining. The silhouette was gone. Just like that. As if he had never been there at all. Where the hell'd he go? Ramirez gasped, collapsing against a rock, chest heaving. His arm bled freely, shirt soaked red, but his grin hadn't faded. Ghost in the mountains. Daniels, ever the realist, shook his head. Whoever he is, he saved our asses. That's all we need to know right now. Blake's jaw tightened. He didn't like mysteries in the field. Too many lives hung on details. But he couldn't deny it. Without that hidden shooter, they'd all be dead. Hayes pressed harder on Cole's wound, looking up at Blake with blood-smeared hands. We need evac, Chief, now. Blake nodded, forcing his focus back. He grabbed the radio, static still hissing in his ear. This is Falcon 2-1. Do you copy? Repeat, Falcon 2-1. Heavy contact, multiple casualties, requesting immediate extraction. For the first time in hours, a voice crackled back. Falcon 2-1, this is Overlord. Copy your request. Birds en route, ET at 20 minutes. Hold your position. Blake let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. 20 minutes. They could make it. He glanced back at the ridge one last time, eyes narrowing. Empty. No sign of movement. No sign of the mysterious marksman who had turned the tide. Blake's gut churned with questions. Who was he? Why was he here? And why had he vanished without a trace? But one thing was certain. The SEALs were alive because of him. For now, that was enough. Blake raised his rifle, scanning the horizon. Stay sharp, boys. It's not over yet. The valley lay in uneasy silence, broken only by the distant echo of retreating footsteps and the faint whisper of wind over stone. Somewhere out there, in the jagged maze of rocks, the ghost of a sniper melted back into the shadows, watching, waiting, unseen, and the SEALs would never forget the moment death had reached for them, only to be stolen away by a hidden hand. The valley was eerily quiet now, a silence that felt heavier than the storm of bullets that had just passed. Smoke still curled from blackened patches of scrub, mingling with the sharp metallic tang of blood and gunpowder. Chief Blake crouched low, rifle tight against his chest, eyes locked on the ridge where the phantom silhouette had vanished. The man was gone. Not even a glint of movement remained. His pulse was still racing. Moments ago, death had been inches away. Now they were breathing barely, bloodied, but alive. He turned to his men. Ramirez slumped against a rock, arm tied hastily with a field dressing that was already seeping through. Hayes knelt over Cole, still applying pressure to the wound, face grim. Daniels crouched on one knee, scanning the perimeter with the cold patience of a sniper who didn't trust silence. Blake swallowed hard, his voice gravel when it came. Sound off, Ramirez. Banged up? Still here? Daniels. Good. Hayes. Holding. Chief. Cole's still with us, but barely. Cole groaned weakly, a sound that was half pain, half defiance. His eyes fluttered open, catching Blake for a moment before sliding shut again. Relief rippled through the chief. His team was hurt, battered, but intact. A miracle. No, not a miracle. A man. Blake's gaze cut back to the ridge. Whoever had been up there had chosen his shots with precision. He hadn't just fired at random. He had hunted. Picked the fighters who mattered. The RPG gunner, the squad leaders, the one about to flank Ramirez. Every shot had been purposeful, surgical. That was no insurgent. Daniels spoke what Blake was already thinking. Chief, those weren't militia rounds. Those were ours. I'd bet my rifle on it. Ramirez let out a strained laugh. What you mean some ghost sniper just happened to be on our side of the mountain at the right time? Sounds like a hell of a coincidence. Not a coincidence, Blake muttered. He adjusted his grip on his rifle, scanning the high rocks. His instinct screamed louder than ever. Whoever it was, he was trained like them, moved like them, shot like them. Question is, Hayes said, voice tight, if he's one of ours, why isn't he with us? Blake didn't answer. Because he didn't know. The radio on his vest crackled, pulling his attention. Falcon 2-1, this is Overlord. Bird is inbound. Ada 15 minutes. Say again, 1-5. Mark LAs for extraction. Blake pressed the transmit button. Copy, Overlord. Holding. Out. He released the radio, eyes narrowing at the ridgeline. 15 minutes. That was a long time in these mountains. The insurgents might be regrouping. Reinforcements could be on their way. Or that phantom sniper could still be out there, watching them. He didn't like being watched. Daniels, Blake said quietly. You saw him too? The sniper gave a curt nod. Caught his silhouette. High ground. South ridge, maybe 400 meters. Solid shooting position. But soon as the fight turned gone. Gone? Daniel's expression didn't waver. Ghosted. No trace. Ramirez coughed a laugh, though his face was pale from blood loss. So what? We got ourselves a guardian angel with a rifle? Guy shows up, saves our asses, then mails? Guardian angels don't shoot like that, Daniels said flatly. That was training. Years of it. Blake said nothing, but his mind was running hot. The precision, the timing, the silence afterward, everything about it nagged at him. If this man had been American, why hadn't Command mentioned an Overwatch element? Why had Overlord acted like they were alone? Unless Command didn't know. Unless he wasn't supposed to be there. Hayes broke the silence, his voice edged with tension. "Chief, we need that bird." Cole's fading fast. Lake snapped back to reality, crouching beside them. Cole's skin was waxy, his pulse weak under Blake's fingers. 15 minutes might as well be a lifetime. "Stay with me, Cole," Blake muttered, voice low, steady. "You're not dying here. You hear me?" Cole gave a faint nod, lips pressed in pain. Blake rose again, rifle ready. He scanned the high ridges, the endless teeth of rock surrounding them. Every shadow looked like a rifle barrel, every silence like a trap waiting to spring. He couldn't shake the thought. The shooter was still out there, watching. Daniel's voice came calm but certain. "Chief, he's military. Could be Delta, could be a contractor. Hell, could be CIA, but he's not Taliban. That much I'll bet my life on." Ramirez chuckled weakly. "Guess we already did." Blake smirked despite himself, but his mind stayed sharp. He didn't like mysteries in combat. He needed to know who was on his battlefield. Ally or not, someone with that kind of reach could change everything. Minutes crawled by. The team held their ground, weapons sweeping arcs, nerves raw. Every sound carried, meaning the clatter of loose rocks, the whisper of wind. Blake's eyes returned again and again to the south ridge. But there was nothing. No flash of glass. No movement. Just silence. When the thump of rotor blades finally rolled through the valley, relief came like a tidal wave. The Black Hawk swept low, dust exploding outward as it flared for landing. The crew chief leaned out, waving frantically. "Move!" Blake barked. "Go, go, go." Ramirez staggered forward, weapon still clutched tight despite his bleeding arm. Hayes and Daniels lifted Cole between them, carrying him across the rocky ground. Blake covered the rear, eyes locked on the ridgeline one last time. As the team clambered into the bird, Blake lingered for a heartbeat, staring up at the cliffs. He couldn't see him, but he knew. Someone had been there. Someone had chosen to intervene. And someone had vanished just as quickly. The chief stepped into the helicopter, the door gunner slamming it shut as the rotor screamed. The bird lifted, banking away from the valley, the battlefield shrinking beneath them. Blake finally allowed himself a breath. They were alive. Against all odds, they were alive. But his mind was already working. Because somewhere out there, in the unforgiving mountains, a hidden sniper had tilted the scales of death in their favor. And Blake had a feeling this was not the last time their paths would cross. The Black Hawk's rotors had barely faded into the distance when the valley came alive again. Dust still lingered in the air from their extraction point. But to Chief Petty Officer Blake, it was more than dust, it was unfinished business. Cole was gone with the medics, bleeding out but alive. Ramirez had been forced onto the bird as well, arm bandaged and shaking from blood loss. That left Blake, Daniels, and Hayes on the ground, tasked with the unthinkable, pushing deeper into enemy territory to finish the mission. They should have been dead an hour ago. Yet here they stood, armor chipped, clothes soaked in sweat, weapons heavy in their hands. And though exhaustion hung from their shoulders, Blake could see it in their eyes' fire. The mysterious shooter had given them more than survival. He had lit something inside them. Now they wanted payback. Blake crouched low behind a crag of stone, motioning his men forward. The valley stretched before them, scarred by the firefight. Abandoned decays and torn cloth littered the ground. Blood stained the dirt. But the enemy wasn't gone. They were regrouping somewhere in the rocks, preparing another wave. "We push now," Blake said, voice steady. "They think we're broken. We show them we're not. Daniels gave a curt nod, his sniper rifle slung tight, sidearm ready. Hayes checked his gear with clinical efficiency, jaw clenched in grim determination. "Chief," Hayes asked, "we don't even know how many are left." Blake's eyes hardened. "Enough to come back for us. That's all I need to know." They moved out in formation, weaving through the jagged terrain with the precision of men trained for years to make chaos into rhythm. Every step was deliberate, every corner checked. The air was thick with tension, each breath carrying the memory of near death. Then the gunfire came. It started as a ripple sporadic shots from the high ridge. Then it swelled, cracking down across the valley in volleys. Rounds chipped stone, showered dust, echoed in the narrow passes. The enemy had regrouped. They were coming again. Contact left. Daniels shouted, dropping to one knee, his rifle barking back with deadly precision. Blake spun, firing controlled bursts, forcing the insurgents back into cover. Hayes hurled a grenade up the slope, the blast rattling the rocks and sending bodies tumbling. But this time, the SEALs weren't caged prey. This time, they had room to maneuver and the will to strike back. "On me?" Blake barked, charging forward. They surged up the slope, teeth gritted, rifles barking in rhythm. Daniels moved with cold efficiency, dropping targets one after another, his shots measured but merciless. Hayes stayed close to Blake, covering his flank, his voice steady as he called out enemy positions. The insurgents weren't ready for it. They had expected wounded survivors clinging to life, not a counterattack. Their line buckled under the assault, fighters scrambling, shouts echoing in panic. Still, the resistance was fierce. Gunfire rattled the rocks, echoing like thunder. Dust and blood filled the air. At one point, an enemy fighter rushed them with a knife, leaping from the shadows. Hayes dropped him with a brutal burst, his rifle cutting the man down inches from Blake's side. Blake didn't flinch. He pushed harder, teeth clenched, eyes blazing. Every pull of the trigger was more than survival, it was vengeance. They would not be remembered as the team that broke. And then, like before, the phantom returned. Crack! An insurgent collapsed on the ridge, mid-sprint. Crack! Another fell, rifle tumbling from his grip. A hidden sniper was back. Blake didn't need to see him to know. The cadence, the accuracy, it was the same ghostly hand that had saved them before. Every shot was an anchor, tightening the noose around the enemy. Hayes shouted over the roar. "Chief, it's him again." Blake didn't answer. He couldn't afford the distraction. Whoever the shooter was, he had chosen to side with them, at least for now. That was enough. "Push," Blake roared. They climbed higher, gunfire rattling, grenades booming, the air thick with the acrid sting of smoke. The insurgents broke again, their line shattering under the combined assault of SEAL precision and ghostly overwatch. By the time the last shot echoed across the valley, the fight was done. Silence fell heavy, broken only by the SEALs' ragged breathing. The battlefield was a ruined bodies sprawled in the dust, weapons abandoned, blood staining the rocks. Hayes exhaled hard, lowering his rifle. "They're done." Daniels scanned the ridges, his sniper's eyes sharp. "No, they'll be back. Not these ones, others. Always others." Blake nodded grimly. He knew it too. In these mountains, victory was never permanent. But they had seized the moment. They had turned the tide. He lifted his gaze to the high ridge. Empty, as always. The shooter was gone. Again. Blake's chest tightened with unease. This wasn't luck. Twice now, the man had intervened, saved their lives, then disappeared like smoke. He was no ordinary ally. He had his own reasons for being here. But what reasons? "Chief?" Hayes said, breaking his thoughts. "What do we do now?" Blake's answer came without hesitation. "We finish the mission." The others didn't question it. They knew the stakes. Intel had to be gathered, the network disrupted. Their survival meant nothing if the mission failed. But as they regrouped, Blake couldn't shake the feeling that their unseen ally wasn't finished either. He glanced once more at the ridgeline, the endless teeth of stone stretching into the horizon. Somewhere out there, a rifle barrel cooled in silence, a man melting back into the shadows. And Blake knew deep down that whoever he was, their paths were tied, now threads of fate knotted in the dust and blood of this valley. The SEALs had regained control, but the war in the mountains was far from over. The morning sun climbed higher over the jagged ridges of the valley, casting long golden shafts of light across the scarred battlefield. Smoke rose in thin spirals from patches of scorched earth. Silence stretched over the mountains like a fragile sheet, broken only by the distant call of birds returning to the area. Chief Petty Officer Blake crouched beside a boulder, surveying the aftermath. The insurgents were gone scattered, broken, defeated. Their weapons lay abandoned, rifles bent and magazines emptied, their plans ruined by a combination of relentless SEAL fire and the mysterious precision of a marksman who had appeared and disappeared like a shadow. Ramirez slumped against a rock, bandages stained with his own blood and dirt. His arm throbbed painfully, but his eyes gleamed with exhaustion and relief. "Never thought I'd see the sun again, Chief," he said, voice hoarse but defiant. That ghost saved us all." Blake didn't answer immediately. His gaze was fixed on the high ridge to the south, where the hidden sniper had intervened twice before. He saw nothing now, no movement, no glint of metal, no sign of life. And yet, he felt the presence of that unseen guardian as keenly as if the man were standing beside him. Daniels, crouched slightly forward, cleaned dirt and blood from his rifle. "Ghost or not," he muttered, "he changed the outcome. We wouldn't be here otherwise." Blake finally spoke, voice low but resolute. "We owe him our lives, but we don't owe him answers." "Not yet." Hayes knelt over Cole, who lay pale but breathing steadily under the field medic's ministrations. The tourniquet had done its job, stopping the worst of the bleeding. Cole's eyes fluttered open, recognition and relief softening his features. "Chief," he whispered, voice barely audible. We made it?" Blake placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Yeah, we made it. All of us thanks to a friend we haven't even met." The Black Hawk whirred back into the valley, rotor blades tearing through the air, signaling the next phase of extraction. Blake called in their coordinates and confirmed their readiness to move. The SEALs had regained control, but the mission wasn't officially over. They had to exfiltrate safely, recover intel, and regroup with command. As they moved toward the extraction point, Blake's mind replayed the last 2 hours over and over. The ambush, Cole bleeding, the insurgents closing in, and the unseen sniper who had turned the tide in ways they could hardly comprehend. Every shot had been perfect. Every action had been timed with terrifying precision. The man was either extraordinarily skilled, extraordinarily lucky, or both. Yet the most troubling part was the disappearance. Twice he had acted, twice he had saved them, and twice he had vanished without a trace. That uncertainty gnawed at Blake. Who was he, and why? The helicopter touched down on the valley floor, skimming the rocks with skillful precision. Dust and debris whipped around the team as they climbed aboard. Cole groaned softly but was stabilized in the medic's care. Ramirez followed, limping slightly but alert, while Daniels stayed at the rear, keeping watch as the rotors lifted them out of the mountains. From the air, the valley seemed almost peaceful, a deceptive calm over a landscape that had moments before been a furnace of gunfire and death. Blake's eyes drifted again toward the southern ridge, the jagged outline of rocks where the hidden sniper had perched. Nothing moved. The mountains held their secrets tightly, shadows stretching long in the morning light. Once airborne, Blake exhaled slowly, finally allowing himself to process what had happened. They had been seconds from annihilation. Cole might not have survived without the quick thinking and precision of the mysterious marksman. Ramirez might not have made it past the RPG blast. Daniel's rifle alone could not have held the line. And Blake himself, crouched behind rocks, relying on instinct, training, and sheer will, had come within inches of death more than once. The thought pressed heavily on him. They had been given a second chance. "Chief," Hayes said quietly, breaking the moment of reflection, "do you think we'll see him again?" Blake didn't answer immediately. He looked at the valley below, at the jagged rocks and narrow passes that could hide anyone from view. "Maybe," he said finally, voice steady. "Or maybe not. What matters is we survive, and we keep moving forward." Daniel's eyes narrowed, still scanning the horizon. "He's a ghost. We don't know his name, his unit, his orders. Could be working off intel we'll never see. Could be anyone," Blake nodded. That was the truth. The mountains had given them life, and the mountains had taken anonymity in return. They owed no explanations to anyone, least of all themselves. The helicopter banked, lifting them higher, and the valley shrank beneath them. Blake felt the weight of exhaustion and adrenaline press against his chest. Every muscle ached. Every nerve still buzzed with tension. But underneath it all, there was gratitude, raw and deep. Somewhere in the mountains, the hidden sniper had made his choice. He had acted to protect strangers, to turn a fight that should have ended in tragedy into a survival story. And now he had melted back into the terrain, leaving nothing behind but a trail of unanswered questions and a story that the SEALs would carry with them forever. Blake allowed himself a small, private smile. They had lived. Against the odds. Against overwhelming numbers. Against death itself. And though they didn't know who had saved them, they understood the truth. Some battles were won not by chance, but by skill, courage, and unseen hands. Cole's shallow breathing beside Hayes reminded Blake that life was fragile, and that moments of survival were rare treasures. Ramirez's bloodied but laughing face reminded him of resilience. Daniel's steady presence reminded him of discipline. And the ghost sniper reminded him that sometimes fate was a hand guiding those willing to fight, not always visible, but always there. As the Black Hawk carried them away from the valley, the mountains receding behind them, Blake's thoughts lingered on that high ridge. The battlefield was quiet now, the echoes of gunfire replaced by the wind whispering through the rocks. And somewhere, in those shadows, the ghost sniper remained, watching, waiting, invisible. Blake exhaled, letting the tension ease slightly. He would never forget this valley, this fight, or the man who had saved them all. Some stories end in victory, some in mystery. This one ended in both. The SEALs had survived. The mission, though costly and brutal, had been accomplished. And the legend of the hidden shooter would live on in the memories of those who had stood on the edge of death and been saved by a ghost. Even as the helicopter climbed higher, Blake knew one thing for certain. The mountains kept their secrets well, and the ghost would remain just that, a shadow, a guardian, and a reminder that sometimes survival depends on forces unseen. For the men on that chopper, and for those left behind in the jagged ridges below, life had been granted once more, and they would carry the memory of the ghost sniper, invisible yet unforgettable, wherever their missions took them next. The valley faded beneath them, but the story would endure forever.